in wake of the disaster of the element of fire, we are slowly gathering together, and it is my hope to somewhat expand and modify the program that we have set up for this month. I have falsely announced to my friends at PRS that the lectures. Is there a problem? You know, when I see people, concerned countenance, then that always worries me. What have I done wrong? And in addition to the ones that I'm planning to do wrong, But in any event, I had told some of my friends there that the talks this month will be mostly concerning the various contributions to the tradition that Manly Hall made. And then, of course, we did not put that in the program, and that probably is also a problem on what we'll begin that today, largely because I feel that some of these, especially if the recordings go well, that some of these talks concerning the occasions and the people who I have encountered in my long life, which have had a lasting impact on myself, and which I have tried to convey throughout these many years to other people. So that being the case, I will begin this evening largely with Manly Hall and with my reminiscences of what his approach to the esoteric tradition was. And since he summarized that real early in life in his huge, magnificent book, which is right there and which we'll refer to, and then you can look inside, and the title page, what's wrong? Can't hear.
Yeah, you'll have to speak up even louder.
Okay, we'll do it. I have for some time been inclined to the view that we need a bullhorn or something as like its equivalent, because we have all kinds of loudspeakers and this and that, but they don't seem to do what they should be doing. However, I can still raise my voice. In any event, if we will open up that huge volume, you will see that the title page inside is a beautiful painting of a mysterious historical figure, and he's wearing largely Hungarian magnate's clothes, who was known as the Comte de Saint-Germain, and who counts along with Cagliostro and some others as one of the great mystery figures in largely of the Masonic order in the world. And it has the coat of arms of one of the princely families of Hungary in the picture. More about him later, but in any event, in the absolutely wonderful illustrations, as well as, of course, the contents. So you look, because this was what Manly Hall started out with. This was what really attracted the crowds to him for many years before he had become famous and had written a whole bunch of other books and things of that sort. So inasmuch as I can reckon him certainly among the main figures who influenced me in my life, I felt that I will try to summarize these few evenings now. I will summarize the the main points of influence which I feel I carried away from him even past his death. So that we shall take a look at that book a few minutes later. Now, as you know, the common practice of old people is to tell stories. And so I might as well live up to that a little bit, but the stories for the most part are true, because I am also an adherent of the motto of the Theosophical Society in Sanskrit, Satya Nasti Parodharma, there is no dharma higher than truth. So no duty, nothing that might tempt us to be done, but the truth is always important. Any event, whether all of that is useful to our purposes or not, I thought I'll mention it. Now, let me start with the story. And the story is not just a story, but it's of course something that has happened. Few of you know, and few of you care probably, about the circumstance that when I came to this country, even though I came from New York and from the boat right away to California, I did not come directly to Los Angeles, to my great subsequent regret, but I couldn't do anything about it at the time. The circumstances don't really matter. And I ended up where the place that I refer to this day as the California Siberia, which in other words it's the place where the exiles, the people whom they don't want to see, they go there. So in any event, I was for close to a year in a place that I did not cherish greatly, but where I also made some good contacts, which is a little town past Bakersfield called Reedley, California. Now in Reedley, California, among other things, I, by sheer presumed accidents, found out that in Reedley, California, of all places, there was a Theosophical Lodge. So that right away gave me something to do, because I was in contact with the Theosophical Society in Austria, and I actually wanted to join it there. And the Secretary General of the Austrian section, Dr. Norbert Laupert, I will always remember his name, Dr. Laupert said, well, look, if you are immigrating to America anyway, why don't you join there? Because we would have to transfer you with all kinds of paperwork. And since I'm a natural enemy of paperwork and things of that sort, I said, all right, we shall do that. So meanwhile I was getting the German language Theosophical magazine already, the publication. It was called ADIAR. I've got that shipped after me from Europe. So here I was walking in the halls of a great academic institution called Reedley College, and I was looking at the magazine which had a big Theosophical seal on it. And so one of the young men there immediately ran home to his family, who were the head of the local Theosophical. The guy is a Theosophist. The guy is a Theosophist, he's reading the Theosophical magazine. So I made an interesting contact. There was a nice little group of sort of maybe around 10 people or so. And there is a reason. I'm not just babbling on as may be often the case. So what I met there an elderly lady, Mrs. Helen Lagerson, I'll never forget her name, who was a local landowner in the San Joaquin Valley and who had a fabulous library. So right away she invited me to come to her house and everything, and I looked around, and I would say that a good quarter of the books that I saw were all by one particular author, whom I really didn't know, to my great shame. And the author's name was Manly Palmer Hall, including this magnificent piece. That is my copy that I brought along, and I hope you'll take a look at it later on. So I asked the lady, well, who is this? And I haven't heard of him in Europe. Well, he probably wasn't published in Europe all that much, but he is very well known here and in a number of other countries. Well, that's interesting. Is he still alive? Oh, yes, he's in Los Angeles. So I looked at some of the books. I said, Los Angeles, here I come. And this author I have to meet. And so the time came, not right away, but in due course, which was almost a year. And I went to my first visit to Los Angeles with a fellow theosophist who was also wanted to move here. He was living and working in Fresno, and so we came up here and I said, see, why don't we go to that place where this Manly Palmer Hall has his activities? Sure. So up we went, Los Feliz Boulevard, in we went, very nice building, everything nice and clean, and out came one of Mr. Hall's close friends, but one whose name I tend to forget, although later on I probably mentioned to you. He was the gentleman who used to go with him and with his wife, Manly Hall's wife, to Japan every year, and once Abraxas lets go of his name from his part inside of my memory, I'll tell you who he was. A very, very nice man. He survived Mr. Hall by a few years, and you could see him there a good deal. In any event, so I said, well, I am a member, we were both members of the Theosophical Society, and we have learned about Mr. Hall, and we greatly would like to know more about him and possibly meet him. Oh yes, the man's name was Gilbert Olson. This was just about Mr. Hall's closest friend. Mr. Olson routinely would drive Mr. Hall to his lectures when his lectures were not held yet at the Philosophical Society, because when I came here, the auditorium where the lectures hold place at the present time was not built yet. That took about another couple of years to build. Mr. Hall lectured every Sunday morning at the theater on Vermont, which was called the Campus Theater, owing to the fact that just across the street from the theater on the other side was City College. So this was the Campus Theater. And so Mr. Olson would come and drive up in the big car. After all, Mr. Hall was a big man. And they drove in. Mr. Hall would put out his pipe, and then they would go in the side door to the proscenium lodge of the theater. So that's where I heard him lecture in public first, although then I found out very soon that he was also speaking every Wednesday in the smaller lecture hall upstairs at the Philosophical Research Society. So that's when I saw him really close by. And that was the first lecture that I heard by him was there. So he came out, the little stairway from the library, he came out to a sort of little, little stage on which sat a great big chair. He came, sat down in the chair, waved at everybody and started to speak. And 2.5 hours later he quit. And you know what? I don't think was a person there, and I certainly wasn't one, who regretted the length of the discourse. It was fabulous. Never a note, never a reference to anything outside. It just poured out of him, minute after minute, half an hour after half an hour after hour, and then all of a sudden he would say, without even looking at his watch, which was on him, he would just look up and say, time is up. And then he'd get up, wave at the people in a kind of, and go back the way he came. So I did not meet him yet at that particular time, but I might as well have. And the lecture, absolutely fabulous. Fabulous. So I said, well, now this place and this man I have to stay close to. So sure enough, I kept coming back. Sundays I keep coming back, and some of the weekdays when he spoke, and then before too long we were sort of long-distance friends. Sometimes I was there early, coming on the bus and all of that. You know, I never drove a car. As I said, the only driving that I do is drive other people crazy. That's the driving. But in any event, so then before too long, Mr. Hall stepped off the platform and came over. Oh, he says, you're the gentleman who came up last month from Fresno. Well, I said, not exactly Fresno, but around there. Oh, I said, we're so glad you came up, and where is your friend you came up with? And so we already started a nice conversation, and thereafter, whenever my schedule permitted, I was always there at whichever of the lecture platforms he was speaking. Now, as time went on, I became just a frequent part of the audience. But I came to, in fact, was there anybody here who used to go in the olden days to PRS? But all day long I was trying to think of the name of the lady librarian at that particular time. And I mean, I saw her every day for years, and I couldn't think of it. Her husband was a 32nd degree, very nice man also, but it will eventually pop up. In any event, she was also a long-time member of the Theosophical Society, and a very sweet lady. And then as time went on, I became more and more friendly with her, and we would, when I found out about some of their collection, especially their alchemical collection, which contained one copy of the famous Ripley scroll, excuse me a minute, so I would tell see, her first name was just on the tip of my tongue. I tell you that memory is another one of the curses of the demiurge. There is no doubt about it, but it'll come. So I asked her, well, you think there would be, since these are scrolls, gold scrolls that are about this big, we have to unroll them to see them. We have copies of them, incidentally. So what we usually did there, she would bring out a number of big library tables for us and then unroll the Ripley scroll on these library tables, and we could go and look at them on the table. It's a very, very interesting alchemical codex in full color. The copy that we possess, unfortunately, is not in full color, but it is one of the many. I think there are only 5 copies of the Ripley scroll. And it was obviously, Ripley is an English name, so it obviously came from England. It's a great material, but since we have a duplicate of it, we might as well show that one and not bother the people over there. No, it's not even there anymore. It's at the Getty Museum. And I was one of the rascals who organized the transfer to the Getty Museum, because when Mr. Hall, I'm getting ahead of myself, but when Mr. Hall died, well, let's say the management that took over was not to the liking of all of us, or I would say to few of us, or I would say to very few of us. And so 2 of these few sort of became the spokespersons. They were my late friend Roger Weir, one of my fellow lecturers there, and a splendid collector of books himself. Then Roger and I decided that we somehow have to manage the transfer of the PRS alchemical collection to the Getty Museum. So we were going back and forth between here and Getty, and eventually we managed to make a contact between Mrs. Hall, Marie Hall, his widow, and the Getty Museum. And I just, of course, I and Mrs. Hall were never very friendly. She was a Bavarian German woman of very resolute manner. And if you said something to her she didn't like, she let you know. But in any event, we managed to cajole her. And I said, look, Mrs. Hall, this collection is very, very valuable. And if a public museum doesn't take it or so forth, it will be sold piece by piece, it will be gone. So if you value Mr. Hall's heritage, it absolutely has to go somewhere where it is going to be kept together and being shown to the public. And so then we got her together with Getty Museum. In a couple of months they made their deal, and then it took about 2 years for the Getty Museum to clean up the collection. It is alchemical codices. Some of them are bound, some of them are not, some of them are handwritten, most of them are illuminated in beautiful colors. It's a beautiful collection of stuff. So then when they opened it to the public, then those of us who were still there, who promoted their acquisition, were specially invited, and we were the representatives of the Manly Hall alchemical collection. And he has since then, I didn't bring that book with me, but he has this, the curator, the gentleman, now of course this is the day when I forget things, he is still there, and he has recently published a very beautiful alchemical book himself with colored pictures and all of that. So they are very good people. In any event, that was sort of the major involvement with them subsequent to Mr. Hall's death. But before then, time went on. I had a secular job somewhere in town, and then all of a sudden I got a phone call, and it says, this is Dr. Drake, Dr. Eugene Drake. Henry Drake, Eugene Drake. Maybe it was Henry Eugene, what the heck. I think, Dr. Drake, who was the vice president at the PRS under Mr. Hall. And I used to see him now and then. So I said, oh, he says, what contract can help you? Oh, he says, would you mind coming up to see me? I have something that might be of importance to you. Well, I said, certainly. So when do you want to see me? And he says, I said, I'll be coming home about 4 o'clock. Can I come up? Oh, sure, come up to my office. So sure enough, what it turned out to be was that they had a lecturer. So whose name I don't want to remember, I remember. His name was Dr. Douglas Rowe. He was a recent graduate of USC and a very, very smart young man. Well, it says Dr. Rowe, who has been lecturing here for the last couple of years, has suddenly died. He must have been not very much more than 28 years old or something. Well, I said, that's terrible. That looked like a very talented man. He said, yeah, well, certainly, but our problem is now that we are lacking a lecturer. And I was talking with he always called him Manley, which the rest of us didn't. To us, he was always Mr. Hall. So I said, well, if you are thinking of me, I can come up and talk to you. So a day or so later, I was up there, and everything seemed very right. So he said, well, come on over to Mr. Hall's office. So we crossed the little courtyard there. Mr. Hall came out of his door and saluted us, and so Dr. Drake told him of what was going on, that they were hoping that Dr. Hoeller here could be the replacement for Dr. Rowe, and all of that sort of thing. And he looked at me and he said, he said, what is your rising sign? Astrological. I said, well, my rising sign is Sagittarius, and so is my sun sign. Would you like to look at it yourself? I used to keep a little horoscope, miniaturized horoscope about this big, in cellophane or something in my pocket. So he could look at the entire horoscope, and he knew horoscopes very well. So what do you think you would want this? And I handed it. Oh, he said, you have a horoscope. Well, let me look at it. Oh, he said, we are going to get along just fine. We are going to get along just fine. How are you? So that was the beginning of my career at PRS. And the evening that had been the evening of the previous speaker was Wednesday evenings, so that became mine in the smaller auditorium above. But pretty soon Mr. Hall had some engagement elsewhere, and he said, well, would you want to take my Sunday? I said, I'll be happy. So now whenever he was not around or otherwise had other things to do, then I spoke on Sunday morning as well. Within a matter of years, I was Mr. Number 2 PRS, and we got along very, very nicely. And I must say that I'm not what do they call it, a celebrity hound, so I don't push myself to people because they are famous people. If it should so happen that we'll meet or so, that's fine. But I don't like that particular complex. So obviously I was not here either. But I would see him practically every day, because whenever I came up there for various purposes, library or otherwise, when I say library, there is a name floating around, but it's still not coming. All right, you don't want to do that. So I was from then on I was part of on the lecturing staff, and I helped out with whatever other things I could do, some books, things of that sort. And then came, it was several years already, then came another unfortunate circumstance. Dr. Drake, the vice president, who was a long-time friend of Mr. Hall's and who had been there for a long time, all of a sudden died. He had a heart condition, and they were going to do, I think, I remember all these things that are so unimportant when I can't remember my friend's, the librarian's name. So there you go. In any event, he had a heart condition, and I think they did a valve repair on his heart, and he did not live through, and he died. Mr. Hall was very, very unhappy. He really liked Henry Drake, and when he was friendly to somebody, when somebody was Manly P. Hall's friend, then you had a friend. And he was extremely solicitous of the vice president who died away, and to his family and everything else. And then for a long time we didn't have a vice president. Somebody would come, somebody would go. But in any event, I sort of became, I don't think I should promote my core cause that one, but let's say I was there every day, and then went after my other business and so forth. So I was pretty well known at PRS. I don't need to say anymore. In any event, this was, I'm trying to, anyway, over 20 years. I was there at PRS and trying to do what Mr. Hall wanted done. And he would have various questions, and we discussed this, and we had a very nice sort of semi-academic relationship. And I really loved it. And so as time went on, and that went on too, and then he did pick, I think, one or two more people who became vice presidents, and one of them ended. There was a lawyer, he was a corporate lawyer, I think, before, and he died under unpleasant circumstances also, namely he killed himself. Not a very good advertisement for the philosophy, but maybe it's a good advertisement for a particular brand of firearm, I don't know. But in any event, that also occurred in the meantime. So in any event, I came to obviously listen to a lot of his lectures, read a lot of his books, do a little bit of work on editing, because we were publishing a periodical. I think it came out about every 2 months, which initially, see, I remember these things which are unimportant. Initially it was called Horizon, and then some outfit bought the name Horizon, and then obviously it wasn't Horizon anymore. So now it became, I think it was called PRS Journal, and in it usually was a long article by Mr. Hall, quite a few reports about the library and about books by the librarian and various others, but it came out, everyone was really nice. In addition to which, they also published, every quarter they published a program of who is going to lecture and so forth. So I was there until it past Mr. Hall's death. Mr. Hall died about 9 years short of 100 years old. I need to look up the data, but I'm almost sure of that. And I was still there. But the people who took over, I did not feel comfortable with. The change was too big. Well, let's see, 90, yeah. He died in 1990, 10 years before he would have been 100. So I was wrong on that, because he was born in 1901. And my mathematics was always bad, and my grades were almost always bad, so I'm probably wrong, but it was somewhere around there. And certainly we were here already in Besant Lodge when he died. In any event, now in the new very fine historical work which I have been touting here now for a while, Mitch Horowitz made a sort of a very fine introduction to the importance and to the work of Manly Hall. This is a work on history, you know, the secret, the modern occultism, and this is under the chapter of the secret teachings, old and new. So he is writing there, in the fresh wave of movements and teachers, there appeared a vast influx of new occult literature. He's talking sort of about the early part of the 20th century here. Claims of hidden knowledge, of secrets of antiquity were common. Few withstood the scrutiny or attained posterity. But one work justly gripped seekers of the new era like no other. It was a massive and extraordinary curation formally titled An Encyclopedic Outline of Masonic, Hermetic, Kabbalistic, and Rosicrucian Symbolical Philosophy, being an interpretation of the secret teachings concealed within the rituals, allegories, and mysteries of all ages. Or, as better known in shorthand, the secret teaching of all ages, and that is the book. So privately published on a subscription basis in 1928. Did you ever buy a book on a subscription? The author is collecting money in order to publish the book. And if you give him a certain amount, then you are assured one volume at least, maybe more. So it was that kind of an arrangement, and there were special divisions of as many books as there were ordered. There were those that were the special books for the members of the Theosophical Society. There were those that were for the Masonic lodges. All of these were subscription volumes, but it is. Later on, when you come up and open up, it is an absolute marvel. Just the looks of it will knock you down. So, and that was published when he, Mr. Hall, was just 27 years old. The magisterial volume immediately became, and remains perhaps, the most thorough, learned, and variegated codex of esoteric and symbolic mysteries. And it has seen since then at least one other big edition, and that is one that is the 50th anniversary edition after its publication. And then there are various editions that are much smaller and consequently not so easy to read and doesn't have such good illustrations in it as the others. But it is an absolutely fabulous work. It is really, I mean, that's just my judgment. It is, the entire book is somewhat in the style of the French encyclopedists just prior to the French Revolution. The encyclopedists who were Diderot and d'Alembert and Montesquieu and one more guy, one more Frenchman whom I can't remember, their idea was that they would put together a series of books which contained all the valuable knowledge in the world, so that, and that this would be the great encyclopedia, and that somebody had many volumes, of course, that if somebody had their encyclopedia, he had access to all the human knowledge throughout history. It's only a Frenchman can be so humble, shall we say. But those were and so what I mean, Mr. Hall even mentioned to me, well, you know, I had a little bit the example of the encyclopedists in my mind, that we should find a very well-produced, beautiful volume which would have everything, at least in outline form, everything present within the esoteric field, within the occult field. So somebody had that book, they would have access to the occult knowledge of the ages. Maybe not all of it, maybe not of every century, but the overwhelming majority of it. And from time to time, when he was lecturing or when we were just conversing, he would come up with something relating of how difficult it was and how expensive it was to put out this first book. And for instance, he told us that he absolutely wanted an index. He said a book without an index is worth nothing. He had a word for it. A book without an index is a mere fragment. That's a very manly Hoellerian expression. So obviously it is indexed very well. And he said, you know who made the index? No, I don't know, how would I know? He said, well, there was a poor intellectual in San Francisco whom Mr. Hall met. And he was a paraplegic. And so Mr. Hall was just making conversation with him about this fabulous new book that they were about to come out with. And so this poor man, the poor paraplegic, he volunteered to make the index. And he says he was lying in a bed, he had a pencil or a pen in his mouth and paper in front of him, and he wrote the entire index for that gigantic book. And then came the artwork, because Mr. Hall was very keen on that. You can see all the later books that were published by PRS and for the most part by Mr. Hall are all, well, they are not as fabulous as this, but they all have a certain visually artistic refinement. Mr. Hall would not tolerate to publish a book that was not beautiful, beautifully bound, beautiful illustrations and so forth. And so that brought up who is going to make the illustrations. So all along came somebody who, believe it or not, I even managed to meet sometimes later on, as he was already in quite old age. There came a gentleman who, by the time I met him, was living in Laguna Beach. There are worse places to live than in Laguna Beach. In Laguna Beach, his name was J. Augustus Knapp, K-N-A-P-P. And he was a fabulous artist with a great proclivity for esoteric subjects. So he volunteered to do the illustrations, particularly the big plates, as we call it, which completely covers a page. And the only interesting thing, they're good, the only interesting thing about that is, or not maybe the only one, but one, that Mr. Knapp had the originals, of course, that he made. And then quite a number of years later, he was already quite an old gentleman, when the 50-year anniversary edition of this book came out. That is the one that I have. And this one, Knapp made available to us at PRS the original artwork of Knapp. So we had an exhibit of the artwork, all the big pictures in the library, and what we found out when we made that was not the librarian and myself in her tray, this no librarian whom I can't remember. In any event, we brought out some of the recently printed big pictures of this book, which was the 50th anniversary, and we compared them with the reproduction of the original. And you know that the new one was better than the old one. Of course, because meanwhile the means of reproduction and color reproduction and so forth had improved in 50 years very, very measurably. And so we had an exhibit that went through the library and even some of the other books, and we had one row of pictures hanging on the wall of the original, and then one of the recent edition. And there's no doubt that the recent edition was better and more conforming to the artwork of Mr. Knapp to begin with. Now I had some curious little experiences with Mr. Knapp. Also designed at that time, way back in the 1920s, on Mr. Hall's big request, he designed a tarot deck, which came to be known as the Knapp-Hall deck. It's a very unusual deck. The symbolism in it comes, of course, mostly from Manly Hall, but the artwork is all by J. Augustus Knapp, and it is absolutely unique. You know, I always brag about it, but I never show it to the people. I have well over 60 decks of tarot cards at home. So don't tell the thieves. So, but they're there. And among them, I managed, I think the angels were looking out for me. As I was looking for tarot decks, I found an original first edition of the Knapp-Hall tarot deck, and that's the one that I still have. They reprinted it 2 or 3 times since then, but none of them are as great as the original, and I've got it. So in any event, so that was one issue, and then we in turn at that time we made side photograph copies of all the tarot deck, and then we projected it in the big lecture hall, which we had already by then. We projected it on the white wall, and so we went through the entire deck. I don't know, it was maybe, it was probably about 10 days of lectures of mine about the tarot in general and showing them this particular tarot deck. Also, unless you thought that I was going to move on to something interesting or more interesting, also I became part of the clergy of a small but very artistically beautiful church in Laguna Beach, on Church of St. Francis on Park Avenue, where inside the church it is full of frescoes. And these frescoes are almost entirely copies of pictures that are in Manly Hall's big book. So if you ever go to, it's still there, St. Francis American Catholic Church on Park Avenue. If you go in, you see, you will recognize the pictures that you have seen in what we like to refer to as the big book. And leaning on a cane and already pretty much in old age, J. Augustus Knapp would come into church somewhere and he shook hands with all of us. And he said, well, we are so happy that your pictures are here and makes us, and I said, makes us look at something that is really artistic, unless some kitschy, holy picture, you know, that is frequent in churches. So I managed to actually meet the old gentleman, and he had certainly done a very wonderful job. You can look through it later on. So now I should have been contenting myself with a little more into the introduction of Mitch Horowitz here, but he writes, Hall's book appeared in oversized folio format. So if you want to know what the format is, it's oversized folio, whatever that means. But oversized folio format resembling the illuminated manuscripts of the Middle Ages, which with a breadth of material that retains its ability to astound. Pythagorean mathematics, alchemical formulas, Hermetic doctrines, the working of Kabbalah, or Renaissance iterations of it, geometry of ancient Egypt, Native American mythology, uses of cryptograms, an analysis of tarot, symbols of Rosicrucianism, esotericism of the Shakespearean dramas, Atlantean thesis, and humanity's symbolic connections to nature were just a few of Hall's topics. Well, that's quite a few, of course, yeah. So I'll read another one of his paragraphs if you don't mind, but this is really a worthwhile book to have. And as soon as I can get our book budget in order, with quest books and so forth, then we will get certainly some more copies of Mitch Horowitz's modern occultism. And he comes to town now and then. He's a very interesting man, very intelligent man, somewhat eccentric, but then all of us intelligent people are. You see. So anyway, then probably if he stays other than a couple of nights, I could invite Mr. Horowitz to give us a talk here. And he's a famous man. He was the head of a major publishing company for many years. So he was both writing and publishing and all of that. He's a brilliant, brilliant man. And eccentricity or no eccentricity, I like him very much. And as I would say, a book like this is of very great value to people who get into this field, because it's written by a devoted, dedicated historian who is really devoted to the truth, who won't mind anything that he cannot verify, and as such it is really a very valuable source. You want to look up something, it doesn't even have to be as big a person as Aleister Crowley or so, or somebody of the minor Scientologists of the 20th century. You will find them usually described accurately, which probably the Church of Scientology would not be altogether happy about. But in any event, it's his historical work. No, there's quite a bit here about Mr. Hall personally. That his parents, Mr. Hall was born a Canadian. He was born in Canada, and there are all kinds of legends that his parents rejected him as soon as he was born, and that they put the baby out in the Canadian winter or fall, out before the door, hoping that somebody would pick up the baby. Now, this has never been verified, but let's put it that way, their nefarious activities did not bear fruit, because the baby was picked up and then raised by his grandmother, who apparently was a fabulous woman, and she eventually moved to the United States with her grandchild. The scale of his bibliography alone, I mean the books that he wrote, was extraordinary. It's nearly 1,000 entries, ranged from the core works of Plato, Aristotle, and Augustine to translations of Gnostic, Nicene, Hermetic literature, to writings of Paracelsus, Claudius Ptolemy, Francis Bacon, Basil Valentine, and Cornelius Agrippa. I hasten to add that these are all alchemists, to works of every variety on ancient and esoteric philosophies, religious, mythic, or metaphysical, that have expressed themselves in symbol or ceremony. Hall was born in Petersburg, Ontario, so that's as Canada as you can get, on March 18th, 1901. March 19th was his birthday. We always had a birthday party for him in the library at PRS, and we used to have a royal great time. Just to, I mean, what the heck, I'm not going to be prosecuted for it. Let's put it, it was always a real good time if Mrs. Hall was not present. Okay? You know, husbands and their wives are often very different. But the thing is, again, it's just that bilingual with German, and I don't like somebody who speaks a bad Bavarian German. I don't care who she married to, and a number of things of that sort. But anyway, sometimes, and then also, you know, she liked to occupy the floor. She was the second wife of Manly Palmer Hall. His first wife was a movie actress when he was active in the studios, and she ran into some personal difficulty, I think, outside of the marriage, and she committed suicide. So his first wife was a suicide. The second wife could get away with any crazy thing because he didn't want her to go the same way. Now this is of course a nasty thing to say, but I am prone to such. So what are you going to do? But anyway, however, Mr. Hall with his mother, who was how should I put it, a heterodox physician. She was naturopathic and everything else but psychopathic, because she was a very smart old lady apparently, who wasn't always old, but always a lady. So why do I come up with these things? So you know, in any event, she brought the baby up. And she brought the baby to America. First they went to Chicago. Now in Chicago they did quite well because their relatives in Chicago are the Palmer family, who owned and built the famous Palmer House Hotel in Chicago, and who obviously had a lot of money. But from Chicago they moved to New York, and that was where Mr. Hall gathered his material for the big book. Because then, as he was growing up, every day he was at the... What's the name of the big museum in New York?
Metropolitan Museum.
Excuse me? Metropolitan, yeah. And so he was at the Metropolitan Museum primarily scanning their library. And of course that was before there was any scanning equipment. He scanned it all in his head. So that is where he did all his research on occult matters at the Metropolitan Library. And then eventually, they, like so many people, they got tired of New York, which one would really get tired of it now, but not so much then. And then Grandma, my grandmother, as he always referred to her, he has a book about her too. And the grandmother then said, well, let's go to California. It's warm all the time, it's a nice place, they don't have any fires. No, she didn't say that. But in any event, they came here, and by then Mr. Hall, I think, was about 18, 19, and he was anxious to exercise his craft of reading and writing and things of that sort, but it soon ended up in Oceanside, California, where there is even 2 days a very impressive establishment that is called Mount Ecclesia, and that still is the headquarters of the Rosicrucian Fellowship, which was founded by Max Heindel and his wife. And it's a very nice place. Now, Max Heindel was also a very nice man. So he took in Mr. Hall, and he made his library available to him, and they talked occultism from day and night. After about a year or so, Mr. Hall had enough. He always spoke and wrote in very laudatory terms about Max Heindel. He said that he was a thoroughly honest, good man, and a great teacher. And so he was sort of Manly Hall's first living introduction to the occult field. But even there, as Mr. Hoeller, I think, stayed there only about a year, and then he came to Los Angeles. So the thing was not that he disliked Heindel or the Heindelites, but he had work to do of his own, which was really mainly the task of reviving the esoteric tradition. And he did not wish any kind of sideline, any kind of interference with that. And I know how that is when people say, "Oh yeah, but you shouldn't be talking about this, Mr. Hall. You should be talking about reincarnation, or things of that sort." That's often when you are lecturing on somebody else's auspices, then they kind of have the right, rightfully or not, they have the right to tell you, "Why don't you talk about so-and-so?" You know why? Because I don't want to. See? That would be my answer. But then I'm a nasty person. And Mr. Hall was not. But in any event, now he started lecturing around here. And we had, in those days, even when I came here, we had an interesting establishment in Santa Monica. It was sometimes called, by those who were not very laudatory, it was called the Spit and Argue Club. Now, the Spit and Argue Club consisted of intellectual loudmouths who would get together and lecture to each other. And usually what they lectured to each other was not what most intelligent people would want to listen to, but then there are always those unintelligent people who will do it. And so, you could go there and start talking about, I don't know, Gnosticism or anything else. So that's how Mr. Hall started. But pretty soon, even from that humble establishment, his fame grew. There's this young man here with the dark eyes and the long wavy black hair, and this guy really knows something. So other people who had venues for lecturers or preachers or so would come to Santa Monica, listen to him there and say, "Hey, mister, would you want to come to our place next Sunday?" So they started hiring him in that fashion. And the first place that hired him, I remember everything that I don't want to remember. This is a curse of old age. The first people who hired him, and on quite a long basis, was a people that was, the name of which was the Church of the People. Not a very ingenious title, I would say, that met not in the Ambassador Hotel, that was too richy, but in the Embassy Hotel, which was not very far from there. And I gave my first big lecture in Los Angeles also there. So I followed Mr. Hall's footsteps there also. But anyway, those people hired him, so I think every Sunday or every other Sunday he would give a sermon, and this was a sort of, New Age wasn't born yet, but it was sort of liberal, not political, not, liberal religious establishment where all kinds of teachings were taught. And so Manly Hall could talk about alchemy, he could talk about just as long as there were people coming to it. And he was teaching there for a considerable period of time. And we brought that that up to him once. I don't know who was with me, but anyway, we said, oh, well, you remember the times, Mr. Hall, when you used to lecture at the Embassy Hotel? And oh, such a smile came on his face. Oh, he said, those were great days, because afterwards we had a group of other people who were more closely associated with the place, who wanted to stay there a while. So we sat around and we talked all into the night, and he said it was just exciting. It was really great. I wish we had that sort of thing now, he said. So in any event, that's where he started. And in fact, if somebody sometimes mentions to you that Mr. Hall occasionally solemnized marriages, he could do that because those ministers at the church of the whatever it was, I mentioned before, you know, that they had their own right to ordain ministers, other ministers. So they ordained him a minister, and he had a ministerial credentials for that. He could perform marriages and whatever, different things. So that was the reason.